welcome to Holistically Speaking. I am Morella DeVoe, your host. Our mission at Holistically Speaking is to be the avenue through which the voices of holistic health reach you at the time you need it most. And today we're talking about something a little bit different. We're not talking about the classic topics you might be used to seeing on the show about physical health or mental health. Today we're talking about healthy farms, land, and healthy people. And my guest today is Seth Gillim. Did I say that right?
Correct.
From the Burlington Intervale Center. Thank you for joining me, Seth.
Thank you for having me.
I have gotten increasingly excited about our show today because when I first thought about inviting someone from the Intervale to join me on the show, it was motivated from my firm belief that when we care for our land and our farms and our communities, it's going to translate into better health for ourselves. And so I'm really interested in having this conversation with you today and bringing a little bit of that perspective to our viewers. So I want to start off by asking you if you can tell us a little bit about how the Intervale Center got started in Burlington and sharing with our viewers what the mission of the Intervale might be.
Sure. The Intervale Center got started 26 years ago. It was founded by Will Rapp, who is also the founder of Gardner's Supply Company. And well, you know, I guess to feed an urban legend, the story that I've always heard, and I'm not 100% sure this is factual, but the story is that Will Rapp had his car stolen.
Oh.
And that he was told by the police that he could go look for it down at the Intervale. And he was like, well, the Intervale, what's that? And they're like, oh, you know, that old dump down Intervale Road. And the Intervale Center was after the last dairy, after the Calkins dairy folded in the 40s, was an unofficial municipal dumping ground full of cars and ovens and microwaves and batteries and God knows what. So he went down there to look for his car. I have no idea whether or not he found it, but he did have the good sense to realize that he was standing on 4 feet of fertile river bottom soil, and had the vision to think to himself, maybe there's a better use for this land other than throwing our junk on.
Right.
And he was that part of that whole generation of, you know, Bernie Sanders, we stand on the shoulders of giants, you know, of Burlington people 30 years ago that really had a vision for how to transform our community, who started dragging all the trash out of there and cleaning up the soil and putting plants in the ground.
Right.
And it has been a 26-year journey ever since of creating a resource for the community for agriculture, recreation, gardening. It's been pretty awesome.
And so if you could state for our viewers what the mission statement for the Intervale is, or, you know, just roughly.
Sure.
You know, it doesn't have to be verbatim.
Right. Well, you know, our motto is farms, land, and people, and that to me really sums it up. It's about engaging the community in their food system by having a place where farms can be locally, where farms can thrive and be sustainable businesses. It's about connecting people to the land, either through gardening, through eating the food that comes from the land, from volunteer engagement, also stewarding of the land through our work with our conservation nursery, which is the work that I do. And then lastly, it's about people, which is, it's great to have a bunch of farms and a healthy land, but the people that enjoy it and that form community around that is what really gives it value for human beings.
Right.
So that's really the work that we do.
Yeah. So I'd love to ask you now more specifically, because it has been an eye-opening experience to speak with you about the work that you do. So within the Intervale and the farming work that we know takes place, and all of the involvement in the community, the work that you do has to do with a nursery, a conservation nursery.
Correct.
So can you tell us what that means? Because until you explained it to me, I wasn't sure what a conservation nursery was about.
Sure. So a conservation nursery, and we're not the only conservation nursery in the state. There's a small one down in the southern part of the state, but basically a conservation nursery is we grow native trees and shrubs that are native to Vermont. That's what I mean, for watershed and wildlife restoration projects that take place all throughout the state of Vermont. And what does that mean? It means that historically we've misused our rivers and lakes. We've paved and plowed right up to the water's edge. And that what we've learned over time is that our waterways need some sort of healthy forest or buffer, is the term people use, alongside in order to make sure that our water is healthy and our land is healthy. And the conservation nursery, we produce the raw material, the trees and shrubs that go into the planting and the restoration of those buffers along waterways.
So what is it that, I feel like this is a class, like, oh my gosh, I'm so curious about what is it exactly that this, kind of ecosystem or that these plants do to conserve the water? How does it make a difference to have this buffer zone of plants between the road and the river versus having the road right next to the river? What's happening there?
Sure. Well, it's multifaceted. They talk about the term that's bandied around is ecosystem function, which is a scientific term that when most people say it, they start to fall asleep. But I think it's a good term to me in that the function of these trees and plants along the river, number one is in an agricultural situation, they'll filter sediment, pollution, and runoff. I mean, we all know about the algae blooms along Missisquoi Bay, for instance. And a lot of that comes from excess phosphorus that's in agricultural soil, finding its way into the Missisquoi River and its tributaries, and eventually going into the lake.
Right.
So a healthy buffer, a healthy streamside forest will slow and absorb that extra nutrients. In some places it's phosphorus, in some places it's heavy metals from getting into our waterways in the first place. That's one of the major things they do in terms of healthy waterways. Another thing that they do is they'll actually hold riverbanks intact. So there's all kinds of things inherent in the soil, which are fine if they're bound up in the soil, but once you mix them in the water and solubilize them and put them in the lake in large quantities, aren't so good. So they'll hold the embankment in place, sort of the same way that a concrete berm will hold the embankment in place. But unlike a concrete berm, it's fluid, and so it can move over time.
So those plants are serving almost like a containing wall of the soil, so that it doesn't.
Right. A containing wall which is not rigid, which moves over time, because all waterways move over time, and which is self-perpetuating, unlike concrete or stone riprap. When it gets destroyed in a flood, you don't have to go in and fix it. It just moves.
So the picture I'm getting is that it's acting as nature's own water filter.
That's a perfect term for it. It's a water filter. And those water filters work both ways. So if you have farmland or development alongside a river, which we do because there's a flat space in Vermont is at a premium, when there's a major event like a flood, it will slow down the water and all the sediment and the aggregate, which is what causes that scouring erosive action with the flood, will get caught up in the forest and not destroy people's farmland, scour topsoil, and destroy housing. So it's a two-way street.
Wow. So the impact that we saw perhaps with Irene might have been lessened if we hadn't had so much farmland and roads like right up the riverbank?
There's a really interesting, if I can talk about it for a minute.
Yeah,
there's a really, really interesting case study in looking at Otter Creek, which flows through both Rutland and Middlebury. The way rivers work is the further you get downstream, in general, there's more water in them. And during a flood event, in general, that water moves faster. It makes sense because there's more water feeding into it. In Rutland, it was just devastating. I mean, people lost their lives, and their wastewater treatment center was totally destroyed. I mean, it was millions and millions of dollars worth of damage because of a lack of, I'm going to say, smart development upstream. Further downstream is Middlebury. And you would think that because it's downstream, Middlebury would be an even more hard hit. But in between Rutland and Middlebury is a whole series of wetlands which have been conserved and restored that slows, sinks, and spreads the water. And Middlebury had almost no damage at all from Irene. And it didn't make any sense. And looking back on it, it was entirely because of all those healthy swamps, forests, and wetlands that had been both conserved and engineered, basically saved Middlebury.
So coming back to your work at the Intervale in terms of the conservation nursery. So you're growing plants
Right.
To then recreate some of these buffers, these filters along riverbanks, along waterways. Where? Everywhere in the state? Like where?
Yeah, we actively partner with conservation organizations, town conservation committees, the Natural Resource Conservation Service with NRCS, which is a federally funded organization, the various conservation districts, a lot of whom get monies from a state-funded program called Trees for Streams. So we provide the raw material so that the many hardworking watershed alliances all throughout the state have good material to work with to make sure that when these plantings take place, they're often being paid for through federal and state money, sometimes private money, that the resources are being well stewarded, that we know they're going to work.
So I'm inferring from what you're saying that your work seems or sounding to me that it's fundamental in the effort to clean up the lake and all of our waterways. Is that?
I think it is.
Yeah.
I think it's very fundamental. I think when you look at the numbers, one of the most cost-effective ways we can begin to have a real impact is to figure out a way to get more trees and shrubs alongside our streams and alongside our lakes, which will produce more trees, which will produce more trees, which will produce more trees ad infinitum.
So the other element of your nursery that you mentioned, and I don't know if you've mentioned it yet on the show or if you mentioned it to me before the show, is the fact that you grow native species.
Correct.
So can you tell us about why native species, what's the difference between species that are native to Vermont versus not?
Right. So we grow native species, and what that means is that everything that we grow, we propagate from seeds and cuttings that we collect in the wild. We do all of our own propagation. We don't order anything in.
All in Vermont, wild in Vermont.
Wild in Vermont, that's right. So, a typical day might have us, driving to Jericho to collect paper birch seeds, or heading to Colchester to make dogwood or elderberry cuttings or things like that. So, of the 30,000 trees that we start every year, everything comes from Vermont. It starts in Vermont, it ends up in Vermont. The initial idea behind that, the logic behind it is that deeply encoded in plants' genetic information is how to survive. And that you can have the right genus and species, let's say a dogwood, Corniceracea, and encoded in that might be the information on how to survive in Vermont, but it also might be how to survive somewhere else. So you could take a dogwood that's grown in Montana, very, very cold, long winters, and plant it in Vermont, and it might not do as well as a tree which comes from Vermont. That was the theory behind the founding of it. And we've been monitoring our plantings in a partnership with U.S. Fish and Wildlife for 5 to 7 years, I'm going to say. And the data shows that that hunch was correct, that for a host of reasons, but one of the reasons we really believe is that Vermont plants know what to do in Vermont. So when it's 35 below zero, and then 2 weeks later it's 20 above and humid, the plant goes, oh yeah, this is January thaw. I know what's going on. No problem. I'm not going to break bud. I know just what's going on. And so that's the kind of plant that we grow. Yeah,
and there's something in what you're saying that I often refer to in terms of food and health, and that there is something in the genetic encoding of a plant, as you're saying, that knows how to behave with that ecosystem. There is something, and we don't even understand what that is, right? There is something in the interaction between a food in its natural state and the way it interacts with the body. We don't even know how it works. It's not about the calories or the vitamins or the minerals. There's just something that's happening that we're still far from understanding. And that's what I'm hearing you say, that there's something in the plant that was born in Vermont, that's coming from Vermont genes, that just knows how to thrive in Vermont.
I would say that's correct. I would say that's correct.
So to give this conversation the spin into why are we talking about this and holistically speaking, it's how do you see your work impacting people's health in Vermont?
I think a neat way to look at it is is to look at the evolution of like Vermont's food culture. And I think, you know, one of the first questions that people, you know, back in the 60s and 70s started asking was, what am I eating? You know, what is this stuff? And they discovered brown rice and whole grains, and you know, people started having gardens again because that had fallen out of fashion.
Right.
And that's sort of the first question, right? And then the next question with like the growth of organic farming and a lot of the small scale kind of artisanal farming in the state of Vermont was, well, I can't produce all my own food, so who's growing my food, right? And then the next step was, who's preparing and processing my food? And then that gave birth to you know, groups like the Farmhouse Group and all the great restaurants around here which specialize in good people who are skilled, you know, making wonderful things out of local food. The conservation nursery comes in as you expand that lens even a little bit further backwards, and you say, well, what's the impact? If we are eating great food grown by great people, processed and cooked by talented cooks, right?
All in our state.
All in our state, but the whole system is polluting the lake. Is that a sustainable model?
Right.
And to me, that's where it's that really that bird's eye view of saying, you know, there's a way to do this that in the long term is going to benefit all the members of our community, you know, plant, animal, and otherwise. And that's one of the major ways that I think the work of the Conservation Nursery and all the watershed groups that we partner with is a big piece, and I think a forgotten piece of the food system in the state of Vermont. It's not something, and why would you think about it when you're at, you know, Misery Loves Company having, you know, wonderful dinner with local ingredients? You don't have to think about it, but I think, but it's a critical piece.
Yeah. I hear you talking and I just get so excited and so fired up because I believe so passionately in seeing ourselves as part of this complete ecosystem, and that we have a role in making it stay healthy and in ensuring that it stays healthy. And so your work is something that I certainly wasn't aware of, but it definitely adds a new dimension of saying, well, yeah, I'm eating something from a local farm at this wonderful restaurant, and I'm supporting my local community, but is this also being grown and disposed of in a way that is maintaining the health of our soil and the health
I like that you said disposed of. That's great. That's a big piece of the puzzle too.
So tell me more about the disposing.
Well, I guess the long and the short of it is this. I can't believe I'm saying this on camera, but I say a little.
You can change your mind.
I say a little prayer every time I put something in the compost.
Yeah.
You know, like that's our resources. Like every time you take food out of the land, which has drawn nutrients out of the soil, and you throw it in the trash and it ends up in a sealed landfill, you're taking a finite resource, which is topsoil,
right,
and you're basically entombing it.
Yeah.
And you're preventing it from ever being reused. I mean, that's a shared resource that our grandkids are going to depend upon. So,
yeah.
I just think composting is important. That's all.
Composting is huge.
Composting is huge.
And we had the show on composting a couple weeks ago, which was phenomenal. It was a huge eye-opener for me as well. So the work you're doing in preserving the health of our waterways, ensuring that our land stays healthy, obviously is going to translate into the health of the food and, you know, the physical body, you know, as we get these really nutrient-rich foods organically grown, et cetera. But I know that you've also mentioned the community several times, and that you've seen an impact on the community from this work. So tell us a little bit about what you see, how you see the work of the Intervale and the Conservation Nursery having on the communities.
Cool. So I guess I'll start with the Conservation Nursery, because one of my responsibilities with the Conservation Nursery is engaging volunteers and interns as I like to say, as active participants in the restoration of our planet, which is, it goes beyond simply being aware of issues like climate change, global warming, deforestation, and saying, here's something that you, as one of 7 billion people, can do tangibly with a few hours of your week to feel like you're part of helping the deal along. And I'll go pull those weeds. We have generally 2,000 to 3,000 hours of donated volunteer labor just at the nursery every year.
Oh, wow.
And our volunteers run the gamut from city market member workers to corporate groups who are working together to have a day out of the office and give back to the community. We work a lot with school groups, organizations like Vermont Works for Women who do some of their vocational training with us. And we give people an opportunity in all aspects of production, from the makings of the cuttings to working in the greenhouse to helping us in our field and with harvest and planting trees out in the community, to actually do something to help. We find that most volunteers have a very, very positive experience, and people are hungry for solutions.
Yeah.
They want to feel like people have had enough cynicism, and they want to feel like, what can I do?
Right.
And I think it's the part of my job that I like the most.
Yeah.
Is being able to facilitate like this in this small way. This is part of this whole process of kind of helping to heal a pretty broken planet, really.
Yeah. And so I'm curious, imagining that people come and say, I want to come and volunteer, and that the experience of being at the Intervale shifts them in some way or is having some impact on them as individuals or on the community overall. Is that something that you've noticed happening?
Definitely. I think, it's either coming as a volunteer and then realizing there's all the other aspects, and I can have a community garden down here, or I can get a CSA share, or I can go to Somervale on Thursday night and hear music. There's lots of different ways that people enter the Intervale. But one of the great quotes that I heard was from someone in our Gleaning and Food Rescue program, which is a program that takes, it's not run by the nursery, it's part of the Intervale Center, run by an amazing woman named Jessica Sanford, and it takes excess food there's always extra food when you grow food.
Right.
There's always going to be, and it uses volunteers to harvest that excess food, bundles it into a share like you get with a community supported agriculture, and is able to give it to low income and working class families in our area. And one of the participants in that program said, I came to the Intervale looking for food and I found community. And that, everyone in the staff was just like, that's very validating when you hear that. It's beyond simply having local organic food or a place to go and hear music, but that it provides a place for the community to have a common meeting ground and to get to know each other and to celebrate.
Yeah, and aren't there also opportunities for like the refugee resettlement program, people who are coming displaced from their countries, and Vermont's receiving them, and I believe I've heard that they've found opportunities at the Intervale to start their own small garden or start farming or start even supporting their families through the Intervale.
The Association of Africans Living in Vermont has land down there that is farmed, which is just amazing, because a lot of the people working down there come from agricultural backgrounds, and beyond the culture shock of being in a new country and suddenly finding yourself in this 7 people in a tiny little apartment, having to navigate a new language, they also have to learn new job skills, without the cultural knowledge of what it takes to do the work that's available to them. And so those of them that are able to use what they're really, really skilled at, which is farming, I think are very happy to be down there.
And of course the life transformation that they're able to experience because of that opportunity is enormous.
Yeah.
So I'm, again, looking at this ecosystem that we're a part of, and that the Intervale is doing such a beautiful job of almost spearheading for our community and saying, our farm, our lands, our communities, our food, our health, the health of the planet are all one. If we care for the health of the community, it all spills into each other. So I want to ask you and share with our viewers, how can we support the Intervale? Since the Intervale has become and is this hub for how we need to think about how we live in our ecosystem and on the earth. How can we support the Intervale's mission?
So there's a lot of ways. I guess I'll outline 4 real quick.
Yeah.
First, easiest is celebrate. Celebrate the Intervale either by coming to Somervale. There's 2 left. There's this week and next week,
Yep.
which is every Thursday starting at 5:30. Free music, free admission, lots of great local food. Just a wonderful time for the family. We go every week. My daughter starts asking on Monday if she can choose out her outfit for Somerville. So she's 4. She can't wait to dress up for Somerville. So that's exciting. But also just celebrating the Intervale beyond our kind of structured events by going down and going for a bike ride, going for a run, walking down into community gardens and just chatting someone up and just using it. I think the more people that are down there and using it, the better the Intervale is. I really believe it's 350 acres, so you can find solace if you need it, even when there's a lot of people down there.
Yeah.
Another really easy way is to buy food from one of the farmers down there, either at the farmer's market or directly from the farm in the form of a CSA, or through the Intervale Food Hub, which aggregates from producers all over the region but buys a lot from various farmers at the Intervale.
Yeah.
You can donate, give money directly to the Intervale Center. Some of our programs are sustaining through sales and grants. Others are not. And people making a financial contribution to the Intervale helps the Intervale Center to be on solid economic footing so that we can continue to grow, continue to invest in. We got a dynamite staff, just an amazing staff, and continue to invest in staff. And the last thing is to volunteer. Volunteer to park cars at Somerville, volunteer to plant trees with the Conservation Nursery, volunteer to harvest excess food with our gleaning and food rescue program.
Wonderful.
And you know, we really, the strength of our engagement in the community is measured by the degree to which volunteers are participants in our work, and that gets stronger and stronger every year. It's really inspiring.
Right. So I want to show our viewers how to get in touch with you, or just go to the Intervale, find all of these different opportunities for internships, volunteering, donation, and even the information on the Somervale, the Celebrate piece, at intervale.org, and all of the staff at the Intervale, all of your contact information is on there, so I'm sure that people can contact you directly as well. Right?
Yeah, it's easy. It's Seth at intervale.org, or if you're not tired of looking at me yet, you can go click on the staff page, and there's a picture of me. You can click on the link there. So,
exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. So we have about another minute. Is there anything left unsaid that you would like to share about
the Intervale?
The Intervale or your work?
It's a really special place. You know, I just feel really lucky. I just feel really, personally, I feel really, really lucky to be there, to be a part of it. You know, people, you know, volunteers. One of the questions volunteers ask all the time is, "What do you like about your job?" Which I think is a neat question that people ask that, and to feel like I'm part of a group of people, and by that I mean not just staff, but everyone that uses the Intervale, which is really engaged in trying to make something out of what was a dump, you know, to repair this place, and has been this incredible 26-year journey of farmers and volunteers and Intervale staff and community members. It's really neat to be a part of this.
Beautiful.
To be a part of this project. So.
And I love that we're closing on that note, because it really gives me a sense of hope that what's been possible at the Intervale of recovery, transformation, conservation is what's possible for the rest of the planet. So thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
I hope you enjoyed it as much as I did, and I'll see you next time.